Hello, Hey Boomer listeners. I am Wendy Green. I am your host. And today we have a very inspiring show. It's a story of an Englishman, an entrepreneur, who hit rock bottom in his career at about the same time that his new home city of Detroit also was hitting rock bottom. And the story today is about the comeback of both our Englishman and Detroit. I was introduced to John Gallagher, the journalist and author who will tell us about this story, from a friend of mine who moved to Detroit a few years ago. She is a member of a Rotary Club there, and her Rotary Club is very involved in mentoring some of the new entrepreneurs in Detroit. She heard John Gallagher speak at one of her club meetings, and she got in touch with me suggesting that he would be a great guest for Hey Boomer. I think when you hear the story of reinvention and the story of never too old to make a comeback, you will agree John is the perfect guest, and this is the perfect story for Hey Boomer. I was thinking today, hi Gail, hi David. I was thinking today that college football starts Saturday. I don't know why, it just popped into my head, but I remember that every Sunday my dad used to call me with the scores for Florida State, which is where I went, for Appalachian State, where my daughter went, for Georgetown, where my son went, and for Rutgers, where he went. So I was curious, who's watching college football this weekend? And what teams are y'all pulling for? Hi, Ann. I wanted to talk about doTerra. So doTerra is the essential oils company that I've been talking about for the last few weeks. And doTerra is a Latin derivative that means gifts of the earth. And for those looking to lower their daily toxic load, aromatic products are a great place to start. So if you're ready to say goodbye to synthetic fragrances from candles, air fresheners, and other products like that, by adding the non-toxic, high-quality aromas of some of the doTerra essential oils, then this is for you. And another thing I really like about doTerra is that they have set up a foundation that they call doTerra Healing Hands. And through this foundation, they are helping curb human trafficking and helping victims of human trafficking. And every month they feature a product where the full price of that product is going right straight into that foundation. So I feel really good about that. Heidi Woody is my doTerra wellness advocate, and she can be reached. You can text her at 864-238-8120. You can also contact her through an email contact at www.doterra.com/Heidi G. Woody. She is absolutely committed to wellness. And if you have any aches and pains, any digestive issues, anything else going on, or like I said, you just want to clean up your environment with these fresh oils, contact Heidi. And if you mention that you heard about her on Hey Boomer, you're going to get a free beaded bracelet that you can also put a little essential oil scent on. So please reach out to Heidi. Okay, one more thing. I see Ann, Georgia. Okay, Ann's going for Georgia. Who else? Who other teams? One more thing. Okay, Labor Day is coming up in 2 weeks. And with this surge in the Delta variant and trying to social distance again, I'm wondering if you all have plans for Labor Day. Because I was thinking it could be fun to get together as a Hey Boomer community and spend a little time getting to know each other. Like, you all know me, but you don't know who's listening. You don't know all the other people in our community. So if you think you'd like to get together for an hour or so on Zoom and just chat, and I'll have a little question prompts, things to get us going. Drop me an email at wendy@heyboomer.biz. In fact, you can do that right now. You can pop out, still hear me, drop me that email, let me know. We'll pick a time, we'll add you to the Zoom link, and we'll just have a little get together on Labor Day. All right. One more thing. Oh, Gail, Florida State. Woo. Hi, Wendy and John. Thanks, Ron. Okay, so we want to talk about growing the Hey Boomer community. So I love seeing some new faces on here. Ron David, Bernadette Durkin, thank you. Bernadette was my friend who introduced me to John. Please invite your friends. Tell them about the live show. You can do an ampersand with their name in the comment. That will tag them. You can also let them know that the show is going to be recorded and it's available on this Facebook page and on LinkedIn and on YouTube. And then the audio goes up to the podcast channels. So let's get the word out. Share this great story about John and all that is happening in Detroit and all that is happening in the Hey Boomer community. Hi, John.
Hey, Wendy, how are you?
I'm great. Good to see you.
Thank you. I have to say you said two words you're not supposed to say in Detroit, which is Appalachian State, because they beat Michigan, what was it, 10, 15 years ago, when the most embarrassing defeat ever delivered to a Michigan team was when Appalachian State beat Michigan. So,
I bet, because they're not a very big school compared to Michigan.
Right. So other than that, happy to be here. So.
Well, it was a good school for my daughter. So.
I'm sure it is, right?
Okay, so let me tell you a little. Let me tell the audience a little about you.
Sure.
John is a veteran award-winning journalist and the current author. He was a reporter and columnist with the Detroit Free Press newspaper for more than 30 years. And John covered the ups and downs of business news, including entrepreneurship, economics, labor, urban planning, and urban recovery. His books include Reimagining Detroit, Opportunities for Redefining and the American City, which the Huffington Post listed among the best social and political books of 2010. Congratulations.
Thank you.
His newest book that we're going to be talking about today, The Englishman and Detroit, tells the story of the rise of entrepreneurism in Detroit in recent years. John was born in New York City. He attended DePaul University in Chicago and Columbia University in New York. He and his wife live in Detroit, and he was telling me they can see the lakes and the rivers from where he is, and they enjoy sailing among the Great Lakes and now have picked up kayaking. So right. Very nice.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. Happy to be here, and hi, everybody.
Yeah, so let's start right from the very beginning of this book, John, because I found this book fascinating. It was a good read. You could tell that you're a good storyteller from reading this book, so I appreciated it.
Thank you.
And in the preface, you state that Detroit is still producing vehicles, still has a vibrant music scene, but the image that those of us who have not been to Detroit in the last, 15, 20 years is of this decaying city. So tell me about where it was and where it is today.
Sure. Well, if there's any American city that had to reinvent itself, Detroit was at the top of the list. I mean, all the heartland cities, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Cleveland, all sort of declined a lot as American manufacturing declined in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And Detroit, being so dependent on the auto industry, suffered more than anybody. And the jobs just drained away. The population plummeted. Big parts of the city were vacant. Downtown was pretty moribund, and so you had this image that you talk about, the the Rust Belt capital of the world, and people in other cities, lamenting their own urban problems, would say, well, at least we're not Detroit, right? So that, I mean, I heard that over and over and over. So that was sort of the image. But in the last 20 years, Detroit's actually learned a lot from its mistakes, and it's been reinventing across a whole bunch of ways. So one is the whole downtown has just come alive again. All the sort of empty office buildings from the 1920s, they've been reinvented as condos and apartment buildings. There's dozens of restaurants and shops opening, beautiful new riverwalk along the riverfront. Out in the neighborhoods, a lot of the vacant land has been remade as recreational sites, skate parks, playgrounds, urban agriculture. We're a big leader in urban agriculture. People come here from all over the world to see how Detroit does urban farming
Huh.
within city limits, and entrepreneurialism, as you mentioned, because our economy for 100 years was based on the biggest industrial operations in the world. I mean, at the age of 18 or 21, whenever you finished whatever schooling you did, you went down the street to Ford's or GM or Chrysler, and you got a job for life, either on the line or as an accountant or engineer or whatever. And as those jobs began to dry up, as the manufacturing moved away, Detroit didn't know what to do for a long time. And about 20 years ago, it began to invent from scratch, totally from scratch, this entrepreneurial ecosystem, which includes incubators where startups go to learn how to do it. Tech transfer offices at universities that spin out university research. Lots and lots of venture capital now. I mean, used to be no venture capital at all. Now there's billions of dollars floating around, bankrolling startup companies, and the whole psychology has changed. So that it used to be, if you said you were an entrepreneur, it used to be like saying you were a consultant. I'm not unemployed, I'm a consultant. Now it's I'm not unemployed, I'm an entrepreneur, which meant you were unemployed. Well, now it really is something significant, and I think for people from all walks of life, accept that you can turn to startups and reinvent your life, and that's what my book is about. How Detroit did that.
But it was interesting, John, when I was reading your book, you actually talked about the fact that in the 1800s, I guess, when the car industry was first starting up, they were basically entrepreneurs too.
Right. Well, actually, it's been said Detroit was the Silicon Valley of 1900, and guys like Henry Ford and Walter Chrysler and the Dodge brothers, Dave Buick. I mean, all these famous names. They were startup entrepreneurs. I mean, garage tinkerers. Henry Ford used to be a marine engine mechanic before he started tinkering with, putting an engine on a carriage. But because the demands of the auto industry were for such intensive capital investment and such huge workforces, they used to have 100,000 people working in a single factory here in Detroit. That the need became for these more for corporate managers and these enormous, top-down command and control type organizations, and entrepreneurship fell out of favor very, very
Yeah.
quickly, very, very quickly. And it was only almost 100 years later that it began to come back here in Detroit.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. So the Englishman in your story,
Right.
who is he and what was his role in this?
Well, Randal Charlton is a British-born entrepreneur. He came to Detroit in the year 2000 at the age of 60, so well into his career. He had first 30 years of his career as a sort of a agricultural entrepreneur, doing all kinds of things, selling better breeding programs for dairy cows in Australia and setting up dairy farms in Saudi Arabia, and raising growing roses for the Mother's Day market, and all kinds of, he ran a dozen different businesses. And then about 1990, he had on a whim, he started this restaurant in Florida that poured his heart and soul into, and it failed spectacularly. He was broke. He was even briefly homeless for a while. And that began a string of what I call his wilderness years, where nothing went right for him and everything he tried flopped. He grew increasingly despondent about, well into his 50s. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? And then a friend who was a venture capitalist in the life sciences tracked him down and said, I want you to start this new company I have an idea for, basically selling tissue samples, tumor tissue samples from human biopsies to pharmaceutical companies so they can use them to test new pharmaceuticals against cancer and other diseases. And he did that, and he came to Detroit. He needed the kind of the most inexpensive but class A lab space in the country. And Boston was too expensive, New York was too expensive, San Francisco was too expensive, Boston or Detroit being virtually empty, but
Empty, right?
but had this wonderful class A new lab space. Came here and found it, and planted his flag here and built this company into an amazing success with tens of millions of dollars in sales. And then he went on to run Techtown, which was
Okay, wait, let me stop you. So when this person first contacted him about doing this pharmaceutical work as opposed to the work he had been doing, he was hesitant at first. He didn't jump at this right away.
right. I think part of that was his lack of confidence at that point, and he talks a lot about this. He had really lost his confidence, uh, and he said to this venture capitalist, "Well, what do I know about human tissue samples and pharmaceutical research?" And the venture capitalist said, "Well, look, you're a businessman. I know you've done business all over the world. You know how to build a business. You'll hire great scientists to do the technical end. Please give it a try." So he did. He eventually accepted it. And one of the stories I love is that he had been so down and out, working minimum wage jobs, and he got three job offers on the same day. One was to be an animal tender at a zoo. One was to be a sandwich maker in a sandwich shop, and the third was to be CEO of a new biotech startup at $100,000 salary. which am I going to do, right? So
Right. And that's not what's not typical is that this venture capitalist would know any of us who are retired and offer us that kind of job. But what is typical is this feeling of, what do I know? I'm not good enough. I'm too old. I can't do these kinds of reinvention things again. And he came through with that.
right.
So then, as you started to say, he found these research labs. Why were there good labs in Detroit?
Well, the Detroit Medical Center, which is the big hospital center here, had a new cancer center called Kermanos Cancer Center, and the top floor with state-of-the-art labs for testing and so on weren't occupied yet. They would be within a couple of years, but in the meantime, the state of Michigan and Detroit Medical Center knew of Randal and what he was trying to do, and they said, "Well, let's put you here, and we'll give you a real break on the rent, and we'll help you find lab techs to help you out," because they were desperate to build up a new biotechnology industry in Michigan. Yeah, this is
Mhm.
when the auto industry was completely falling apart, and this was one of the few sort of rays of hope that a new industry might come along. So he got a lot of attention from them and got to stay in these world class labs for about the first 3 or 4 years that his company was in business, and then he moved into what became Techtown, which was an old auto design center that was remade to his specifications. GM donated the building, and they remade it for his specifications, and then that eventually became Techtown, the business incubator, which is now the leading entrepreneurial center in Detroit. So
Right. So Techtown initially was just for his biotech
right,
company.
yeah. Originally, he was the first and only tenant when they first got in there.
So who had this vision of building it out as an incubator?
Well, it was a combination of Wayne State University, General Motors, the state of Michigan, and then Randall. And combined, they got together and they realized they could make a go of this because he had to get out of the cancer center by that time. It was filling up with their own people, and he thought, yeah, maybe I'm going to go out to Kalamazoo, out to Grand Rapids, 3 4 hours away. But he wanted to stay in Detroit, and University, Wayne State University, and the state of Michigan, and General Motors all sort of made that happen for him.
Hmm.
So he's very fortunate that there's really a concerted effort to make this kind of thing happen in Detroit.
So one of the things that I found really interesting about Techtown was that the target market that it went after was not what you typically think of as like the Silicon Valley tech startups.
Right, exactly. It's as Randall likes to say that we're not going after the college kids eating ramen noodles in their dorms. I mean, the Bill Steve Jobs and Bill Gates dropping out of college to, and no, he was a lot of his people that came through Techtown were middle aged, refugees from the auto industry, not just people who had been on the assembly line, but mid-career sort of accountants and lawyers and engineers who had been downsized out of the auto industry. There had been huge downsizing in the auto and steel industries here in Detroit, and I mean, to be laid off was just a rite of passage for thousands and thousands and thousands of people in Detroit, and so they needed to reinvent themselves. And also, you have all the sort of very high unemployment in Detroit, especially among the African American population. And so Randall's target audience was the middle-aged, the laid off, the refugees, the single parents who don't have an MBA, but who had a dream of remaking themselves through some kind of startup situation. And so we do have a lot of tech startups here like Silicon Valley, but we also have an awful lot of small shops, small retail shops, bridal salons, bookstores, coffee shops, restaurants, food business, import, export, importing clothing from around the world, importing art from around the world. I mean, all those kind of people went through TechTown, and that Randal sort of recruited and welcomed.
So how does that work? Say that I go to TechTown, if I lived in Detroit, and said, I want to start this Hey Boomer business, and I have this dream and this idea. What does TechTown do for me?
Well, there's lots of training programs depending on where you are. Some of it is basic, here's how to do a business plan. Here's how to rent office space. Here's what, how to budget. Here's how to hire. I mean, a lot of those businessy kinds of things. And then there's an awful lot of networking, so you can meet fellow entrepreneurs. Randall liked to say that, a lot of incubators time limit your service. If you're not, you either go big and get an IPO after 3 years, or you have to leave. Randall wanted to keep people in there as long as until they actually outgrew it, because he said, we're building an entrepreneurial church and we're preaching the gospel of reinvention through entrepreneurship. Or as he said, we're going to reinvent Detroit one startup at a time. And so you get to meet all kinds of fellow entrepreneurs. If you're a minority entrepreneur, you get to meet other minority entrepreneurs, and you realize you're not alone in this. If you're a woman entrepreneur, you realize you're not alone in this. And then there's access to capital investors. You get to meet a lot of angel investors and that kind of thing. There's these pitch competitions like on Shark Tank, where you go in and you pitch your business and the winner gets some money, and all kinds of training programs and seminars. And if you need space, I mean, you can rent space there at a very nominal rent, or sometimes you just go in for the programs and out. So a lot of hand holding, a lot of encouragement. And there's besides TechTown in Detroit, there's a big one in Ann Arbor. There's a couple in the suburbs. There's others out in Kalamazoo and Ann Arbor. So when Randall took over TechTown, the concept was still pretty new in Michigan and generally, but he really built it into something. And it's really now the center of entrepreneurship training in Detroit.
And would you say that a place like TechTown needs that collaboration of like the university and the city and the state and angel investors?
Yeah, definitely, because it's really not a money-making business. I mean, it's not a real estate play where, you're a landlord, you have an office building and you rent to a lot of startups. It's not like that. You're going to have a lot of people in there who initially can't pay any rent at all. So you need support from the university has to be patient. You need some foundation or corporate support. But fortunately in Detroit, one of the real assets that Detroit still has is that, there was such a great economy here for the 20th century with GM and Ford and all these great universities and all these legacy foundations with a lot of money from the 1920s. There is a lot of money here to support this kind of stuff, and a lot of visionary leaders at the foundations, and I think at the auto companies too. A guy like Bill Ford, who's the great grandson of Henry Ford, who still runs Ford. I mean, a lot of these people are doing really visionary things, reinventing the city. So that helps enormously. But you do need that kind of support. An incubator like TechTown is a community project. It's not just a, for-profit real estate business.
Yeah. So, hey, boomers, as you're listening to this, if anybody is inspired to either look for an incubator where you live or thinking about starting something like this, this is a great book to tell you the story of how that worked. I would definitely encourage that. It's very inspiring, but you are also at a time now, John, where you're going through some reinvention, and Yeah, and when we started, before we came on, we were talking about, it has that been challenging to go from a full-time career and the persona of a journalist to, so who are you now?
Right, right. Well, so people know I worked at the Detroit Free Press for 32 years until December 2019 when I retired. I worked past retirement age, and I wanted to do that. But what's been happening with newspapers nationwide pretty hard. So I thought the time had come, and I left at that point, and but immediately wanted to move into a freelance career. I wanted to do book projects, some more nonprofit kind of work. So I started helping some of the foundations do their research. I've got a big project underway right now with a nonprofit looking at the mortgage industry in Detroit, and doing a lot of books. I really like being a book author. So but you're right. I mean, you go from being a columnist at the leading newspaper in the state of Michigan, and people take your calls, you have people answer your emails. You can call the mayor's office and get the mayor on the phone, whatever. And suddenly it's who are you? You're retired, and people think that you're retired means you're not doing anything. Whereas I immediately started freelancing and doing research projects and some nonprofit work and staying pretty busy. And it is a balance about how much you're going to work for income, how much you're going to do volunteer work. And then there's also the emotional question of, are you okay not being, not seeing your picture in the newspaper as a columnist, and not being invited to the local talk shows and that kind of
Right.
stuff. And so, fortunately, I have a very supportive spouse, and I think partly from Randall's example, I knew a lot about what you should do when you retire.
Mm,
When you retire,
mhm.
and so I won't say I've done perfectly at it, but I think I've managed to hold it together. And ironically, it happened during COVID. I re-
Right.
I retired in December 2019, and about a week later, we heard the term Wuhan for the first time,
Right.
and went into
Lockdown in
lockdown
March.
for the next 18 months or whatever it was. Um, so yeah, I think you really have to be prepared for it. Yeah, and you have to have this balance of how much is just my time for me, and sleep an hour extra a night, and exercise more, and how much do I want to do volunteer work, and how much money do I need to earn in quote retirement. It is a balance, but you can do it if you have some good examples and good support, I think.
Yeah, yeah, it is a balance, and it's different for everyone. Um, Thank you for sharing that with us.
Sure.
So Bernadette asks, how did Randall make his contacts when he chose Detroit as his place to grow? So he was invited, but how did he
Right.
meet all the other people he needed to meet?
Well, it's a good question. Well, he knew that the kind of people he had to meet were, say, universities, science and pathology labs, people at their who would have the kind of lab space that he needed. So we contacted Wayne State University, which is the big university in the city of Detroit, U of M in Ann Arbor, and first he signed a deal with U of M, but it had an exit clause because he realized that what Detroit was offering at this cancer center that was opening was so far superior to anything he could find in Ann Arbor. And he looked around. I mean, they showed him all these labs, most of which were old factories with a leaky ceiling and all that sort of stuff. But then finally, they found this perfect world class, brand new, spick and span lab at the cancer center that he could have for the first few years, and at a cut rate rent, and help finding lab techs from within the university. And so he basically knew from 30 years of doing business, he kind of knew who roughly he should talk to. Like I said, university people, state economic development people. One thing he did when he was traveling the world successfully on business, he always would go to the British embassy in any countries that he was part of, and
Mm.
they would give the commercial attaché would give him suggestions, and then he'd call up senior minister so and so saying, "I'm calling at the suggestion of the British embassy."
Right.
So he kind of knew what doors had to be opened, and he was able to do that. I think it's remarkable that he took, despite this decade of his wilderness years, once he got this final chance to do something good, he used every lesson he had ever learned, painful or not, to make a success out of it, and he's never looked back. So
Yeah. And so that's meaning like the top level people. Now he had to go out and find these would-be entrepreneurs. How did he find and recruit them?
Well, he started a number of programs and put the word out. He called one was called First Fridays, where people come in, wine and cheese and a speaker uh, panel, and he invited in some authors. If you remember the movie, the one with Will Smith, where he plays the entrepreneur, the stockbroker.
Don't
Uh,
remember.
it's the one where he's raising his son.
Help
His
us, audience. Which show is
Yeah,
this?
yeah, it's a movie. Will Smith is raising his son alone at the same.
Oh, right.
Uh,
Happiness, something about happiness,
the pursuit of happiness.
pursuit of happiness.
So that author, the real guy, came in and spoke at one of Randall's events, and had hundreds of people come, and he gradually opened the doors. And when he got to Tech Town, there were maybe a couple of dozen member entrepreneurs. By the time he left, there were 250.
Huh.
He greatly expanded the types of programs that he had, special outreach to seniors and women and minority entrepreneurs. And the word got around eventually. And people like me at the newspaper started to write about it. That's how I met Randall
Mm.
originally. Writing about him and what he was doing. And Cranes, the Cranes Detroit, or Cranes business magazines, they got involved and wrote about it. So the word got around eventually. And he is a marketer. I mean, he knows how to get out there, and he is tireless.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And he's the most um, upbeat, sweet, sincere individual. When I first met him, I thought, I just got to write about this guy. And originally I thought I would help him with his memoirs. And that's kind of how this started out. I did a whole bunch of long interviews, with him about his life and work. But gradually I saw this is really a Detroit story, and a broader Detroit story. So it became the book that you showed here.
Yeah. And so he's no longer with Tech Town, right? He's
Right,
left.
right. He's doing he's now 80.
He's
But he's
80.
he's active as ever. He's religious about his 10,000 steps a day. He
Really?
Yeah, he really believes in that the life of an entrepreneur can be stressful and long hours. You got to stay in shape. He and his wife Lee went home to England for the holidays a year and a half ago and got stuck there. They have an apartment outside London. They live here in Detroit, but they had an apartment outside London, and got stuck for a year and a half by the travel restrictions. But he just got back. So a couple of weeks ago, I saw him about a week ago. He's doing great. He does a lot of foundation work now.
Mm.
There's a senior foundation in Detroit called the Hannon Foundation, and
Mhm.
he's donated a lot of money for a senior art project, like an art
Oh,
contest for seniors. Just
yeah.
and he wrote his own book. His father is the one who built the Mayflower 2, the replica of the Mayflower
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
that the Pilgrims sailed. And his father was a famous war correspondent who built the
Huh.
Mayflower 2 in the 50s and sailed it to America. And it's still in Plymouth, Mass. And so Randall has a new book called The Wicked Pilgrim about his father's adventures, and about 20 other things that he's doing. So,
That's great.
so doing really well.
And it sounds like you're busy. You're on several projects now. Is there anything that you want to share with us about what you're doing?
Well, I'm doing a journalism book that looks at what I did and the fate of the newspaper business and where we're going and what we can learn from that. So that's that. And then I'm doing a lot of sort of freelance work for nonprofit agencies in Detroit, trying to advance the Detroit recovery, which still has a long way to go. And I'm part of a tutoring program for second graders in Detroit public schools, teaching reading, which I think of as the most, in some ways, the most difficult, but also the most satisfying thing that I do. I mean, these kids are so wonderful.
Mhm.
And, you see them for a couple hours a week and try to, help them learn how to read. And
Yeah,
so that sort of thing. And staying busy and trying to have a good time.
it's a great mix, it sounds like. Bernadette, thank you, Bernadette. Launch Detroit, a Rotary entrepreneurship program, has used Techtown as our meeting place a number of times. Launch Detroit is now accepting applications. A little plug here to join the class of 2021 entrepreneur programs for Southeast Michigan startup businesses. So,
Yeah,
like you
excellent.
like you
Excellent.
said, it's expanding this whole entrepreneurship movement.
Well, yeah, and what's interesting, I like to say 20 years ago, we had no venture capital, no incubators, none of these programs like Launch Detroit or any of the others. No, the tech transfer offices at university were not transferring any tech. I mean, we've built this enormous infrastructure from scratch. All the venture capital and all the incubators and like I said, the whole cultural change of what it means to be an entrepreneur and how it's possible for people. And all that happened. And a lot of people did it. I mean, no one, I mean, Randall certainly doesn't claim that he's the one that did everything, but he certainly was an apostle of it and really helped, pardon me, really helped a lot. So,
Yeah. And I love who his target market is, because that takes an extra brave person, I think, to try and reinvent and start over. You've been working in the auto industry all your life. Now you're 60 plus, and what are you going to do? Or you don't have any capital. And so
right.
good
And,
for all these brave people.
and those are the people who have enormous skills. If you're a mid-career accountant, planner, designer for a Ford Motor Company, you've got a lot of skills. And
Yeah,
or if you're on the line, you're mechanically inclined, and there's lots of ways you can put yourself to good use. So,
absolutely. So I always like to ask my guest for one or two takeaways, knowing that our Hey Boomer market is for people who want to live their best life from now until forever, when,
go ahead.
the lights go out. So what would be one or two takeaways you would leave with us today?
Well, I think one of Randall's big messages was the role of confidence in reinventing your life, because he writes very candidly. He talks very candidly in the book about how he lost confidence in a big way, and still and had to struggle really to get it back, and did manage to. But even now, he says he still struggles with it occasionally. So I think that you need all the support you can get, whether from your spouse, your friends, a place like TechTown. Think consciously about how your confidence level is and what you can do to get it up, because that will enable you to sort of try new things. And the other message is that reinvention is possible at any age, whether you're 45 or 60 or 80. You can certainly reinvent yourself. You'll grow on what you were before, but you can certainly move ahead, and you can realize some of those dreams. A couple of generations ago, they used to say if you're 40, you're too old to look for a new job. You're out of the job market at 40.
Right.
Nowadays, 60, 70, 80 people are doing amazing new things. And so Randall's message and the message of the book is that yes, that is possible.
I love those two messages. Reinvention has certainly been a big part of my life. But what's important, I think, is what you said first, too, is that you need the support. I think so many of us think, all right, well, I'm trying to do this. I got to do this all myself. I got to plow through and figure all this out. But, the more you can surround yourself with people that will support you, and something
Yes.
like that, makes
Yes,
it.
and the help is out there more and more, and not just in Detroit. I think in a lot of cities. I mean, these entrepreneurial programs. Sometimes when people call me and say, "I have a startup idea, what do I do?" And I said, "Well, the front door is TechTown, and they will direct you to whatever the right program is." I mean, there's a lot of help out there if you need it.
So if you want to reach John, you can direct message him on Twitter,
Right,
right?
right. J Gallagher _DET for Detroit.
Right.
I'm happy to, if people want autographed copies of the book, you can reach me that way. We'll work that out, or any kind of speaking thing you want to do. And I think we have a Facebook one too. I think
Yes, Facebook is Reimagine Detroit.
Reimagining Detroit.
Reimagining Detroit.
That's
Sorry,
a
I said it wrong.
That's okay. No, that's okay. That's a Facebook page that I have where I talk about issues in reinventing Detroit. And
Yeah.
excuse me, the book itself is called The Englishman in Detroit, and you can buy it on Amazon,
Mhm.
and you can order it to your favorite local bookstore.
Mhm.
So,
And it is a good book, easy read, and full of a lot of good inspiration, I
well,
would say.
thank you. Those are my two goals: to make it a good read and to inspire people.
Yeah. So, and if you don't tweet, and if you can't find Reimagining Detroit for some reason, you can always drop me an email, and I can get it to John. You can also email me about Labor Day if you want to play with us on Labor Day. Let's see, Heidi Woody, our doTERRA wellness advocate. Please reach out to Heidi and let her know that you heard about her on Hey Boomer and get healthy with some of the essential oils. John, this has been great. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. I really appreciate you having me on.
Oh, it's been fun. And I want to tell you who's coming next week. Another fun show, everybody. Next week. So here in the more in the mountains, I guess. We used to hear about the revenuers, right? And they would go in and bust up the stills. Well, here in Greer, South Carolina, we actually have an actual distillery that is making high quality liqueurs from their organic garden that they grow on their property. And also they import a few of the herbs that they use. It's called Vaccaro Vineyards, and the Vaccaro is Renato Vaccaro, who is an Italian, grew up with this whole family of food and, liqueurs before dinner and after dinner and fine wines and all of this stuff. So who knew that we had a place like this in Greer, South Carolina, that you can go and visit and taste the wines and see the fabulous garden and learn so much more than I ever knew about liqueurs. So that would be a fun show. Hope that you will all tune in for that. And I want to thank you for tuning in today. I know your time is valuable, and I hope that today's show with John, the Englishman and Detroit, has been a valuable show for you as well. My name is Wendy Green, and this has been Hey Boomer. Thanks, John. Do you know your risk for stroke or cardiovascular disease? Get screened with Lifeline screening for peace of mind or early detection. Screenings are painless, easy, and non-invasive. Over 700,000 people per year get screened at Lifeline screening. I got screened there myself. Click in the show notes for a special offer for the Hey Boomer listeners.